Today, we're zeroing in on one of the most debated words in any scripture. It's a single Arabic verb in the Quran, and it sits right at the heart of a huge global conversation about faith, marriage, and violence. But this isn't just some abstract theological argument. The source material for this whole deep dive grounds it in a very stark reality, starting with the author's own experience as a doctor, treating women who honestly believed their injuries were their own fault. So at the center of it all is this one verse, Quran 4:34. It lays out a three-step process for a husband to deal with what it calls his wife's nushuts. That's usually translated as disobedience or rebellionist. The first two steps, admonish her and then separate in bed. But it's that third step that causes all the controversy. And that brings us to the big question, right? For centuries, the key word in that third step was understood in a very particular way. But lately, a whole new interpretation has started to gain steam. So has the world's second largest religion completely misunderstood a core teaching on marriage for its entire history? This is where the source material we're looking at introduces what it calls a rebranding. Over the last few decades, a big movement has sprung up to reinterpret this key word, Daraba, to mean something completely non-physical. So instead of the classical strike or beat, we suddenly have this whole menu of new options. Everything from walk away from them to a symbolic gesture. You might have heard the one about using a toothbrush, or even to go on strike against them. Now, here's the thing. The source argues that these new meanings aren't coming from some amazing discovery of ancient manuscripts or a lost dictionary. It claims they're coming from online apologetics, basically a kind of damage control to respond to modern criticism. Okay, so how do we check this? How can we test these new meanings? Well, the source suggests a really simple linguistic stress test. You just take these new definitions and plug them in everywhere else the exact same word appears in the Quran and see if they still make sense. But hold on, even before we do that, there's a big structural problem. The verse is clearly an escalation. Step 1, you talk to them. Step 2, you separate in bed. So if the third step, Daraba, also means separate or walk away, then the escalation just stops. You're just repeating step 2, which, as the source points out, makes the whole logic of the verse kind of fall apart. All right, let's get to that consistency test. Here in chapter 2 of the Quran, God tells Moses how to get water from a rock. The command uses a form of the exact same root word, Daraba, and for centuries, everyone agreed it meant strike the rock. And this just perfectly shows the problem. If we swap in those new meanings, was Moses being told to walk away from the rock to get water? Or maybe to stage a labor strike against the rock? It just becomes nonsense. Let's try another one. This is from a verse about the Battle of Badr. The angels are given a command, using that same root word, about what to do to the enemy fighters. The classical meaning? A physical, lethal blow. So let's apply the rebranded meanings here. The command becomes, what? Walk away from above their necks? Or tap lightly above their necks? In the middle of a battle, these interpretations just completely break down. And this is the crucial point. It's all about context. Sure, the word Daraba can have other meanings, like to set forth an example. But for that to work, it needs grammatical backup. It has to be followed by the specific word for example. And that structure is totally missing in the verse about wives. The direct object there isn't an example, it's them. So if the linguistic test doesn't seem to work, what about the historical record? I mean, how did people actually understand this verse for over 1,000 years before any of us were around? Well, the historical timeline is pretty unambiguous. From the absolute earliest traditions, through centuries of classical scholarship, all the way to modern English translations, the consensus was physical discipline. The debate was never if it was allowed, but how. Not severely, not on the face. These non-physical meanings are a very, very recent development. And this quote from the Hadith is so important. Apparently, after this permission was understood to have been given, women complained to the Prophet Muhammad, and his response was that the men who did this were not the best of men. The source presents this as a perfect example of moral disapproval existing alongside legal permission. He hated the practice, but he didn't forbid it. And that leads to a really simple, logical conclusion from the source. The very fact that there are all these rules, like don't strike the face or don't cause injury, proves that the act itself was considered permissible. You don't create regulations for something you believe is completely forbidden. So why does all this matter? I mean, it's a debate about an old word. Who cares? Well, it matters because these interpretations have absolutely devastating real-world consequences. Just look at this data. The global average for women experiencing domestic violence in their lifetime is 27%, which is already horrifying. But in regions where that classical interpretation of 434 is widespread, the numbers are just off the charts. Some surveys show mind-boggling figures, like 57% in a Pakistani province, or even 98% in one survey out of Jordan. And this isn't just some fringe belief, okay? It gets written into law by religious and state authorities. An Islamic Council in Pakistan officially says light beatings are okay. The Taliban in Afghanistan allows it, as long as you don't break any bones. And this legal framework has direct, horrifying impacts. You get a Saudi judge defending a man's right to slap his wife. You get an Afghan judge telling a woman who wants to escape her abuser that a few beatings won't kill you. The result of all of this? A complete and catastrophic failure of justice. In a country like Pakistan, the conviction rate for domestic violence cases is less than 2%. When the act is normalized, it creates a culture of total impunity. The source material we've been walking through really brings it all home at this statement. It argues that trying to change the word's meaning isn't genuine reform that actually helps women. It's brand management, designed to make the faith look better to the modern world without actually changing anything on the ground. And so that leaves us with this final massive question. When an ancient text seems to crash head-on with modern ideas about human rights, what's the right way forward? Do you insist the text has been misunderstood for 1,400 years and try to change the dictionary? Or do you have to face the text's historical meaning head-on and focus on changing the laws instead?